Hello and welcome back to AGR Breaks It Down. Joining me again is Dr. Brandon Aldinger, and I am your host, Dominic Baker. And we're going to be talking about a very, very fun topic this time around. Would you like to go ahead and introduce our topic, Brandon?
Sure. If you've ever gone into a hotel room, you'll see the ubiquitous sign of don't hang your clothing on the fire sprinkler heads. Those fire sprinkler heads are pretty much everywhere around us, and I've never really thought about them before until a few years ago. We had to do a project about fire sprinklers, and I was very interested in that technology of how they worked. So I thought it'd be a good topic for us to discuss in our podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as you kind of talked to me about it beforehand, kind of giving me a little bit of an outline, I got more and more interested. So we started reading up on some papers. I didn't realize there's just so much background and so much thought that's put into the design of these. I guess they're called sprinkler heads, right?
Yeah, so we've got these sprinkler heads here. Got a couple examples of them with these little glass ampules in there, these tubes, and all these brass fittings and different types of valves, a couple different colors of these, which we'll hopefully get to talk about.
Yeah, so let's start with maybe the origin of these. So how did these even come about? You know, obviously fire safety is a very important thing, but the design of these are obviously very important. So
sure,
they started back in the late 1800s, early 1900s with.
Yeah, so I'm not a history expert or fire prevention expert, but I looked up some of the history of this to try to understand when these came about. Fire has been one of the main concerns for pretty much all of civilization until recently, when we really have these fire control systems. So like city fires were a huge deal. And this was a problem all the way up into the 1800s, but then they started having indoor plumbing, and so you had the possibility of maybe having some type of fire prevention system. In the 1860s is when this was starting to be automated. And really the first model of fire extinguisher head automated version was just some valves, and there was a string that held the valve on. So when the string burned through, it would let the valve go and it would allow water into your building. But
interesting.
That was kind of primitive, and so there were some advances. And that was Civil War time frame that first came out. The advance that we're really concerned about when they started using this glass, it happened in the 1890s. So it was a guy named Grinnell was his last name, and he came up with the first type of fire extinguisher head, automatic fire extinguisher, that revolved around glass being the element that released the valve.
Now, when we say automatic, we're not assuming it's got some sort of digital or analog system behind it. How does that operation automatically work in the case of a fire?
Well, before this, they did have some systems, but it was literally dependent on a person like turning it on.
Right.
So you had to have like a guy turn it on. So that'd be the manual system. The automatic means that it just sits there. It's always there, and then it's passive in the sense that it doesn't have any active thing that a person has to do. But then when the fire happens, something triggers the temperature, and it will then release the water. And so no human intervention is required. It'll protect buildings whether there's someone in there or not, and nobody has to try to think about it in the panic of a fire.
Right. And this is where the interesting relevance with the glass tube comes in, right? So that automatic release of the water happens via this glass mechanism, this tube, that's filled with, from our understanding, a multitude of different solutions.
Right. So the real key about these fire extinguisher valves is how do you get them to release at a certain temperature? Because you want to not have them go off just randomly. But they need to be super stable. They need to last for decades, and they need to be able to withstand that force of that valve pressing on them for a long period of time. But at the same time, you don't want them to go off just because somebody maybe lit a birthday cake in the room and it has a little bit of temperature rise, or it's a really hot day. So you have to have precise kind of temperature control for these things. Well, Grinnell realized that we can make these things work by using certain properties of glass. One of the things that we teach in our fracture classes is that the fracture will only happen when the tensile stress exceeds the glass surface strength.
Right.
So normally when we talk about glass breakage, we talk about ways that you want to try to create a certain strength in the glass or keep the glass pristine, because that's what's really going to determine when this breaks.
Right. The avoidance of flaws really
Right.
kind of helps you meet your operating conditions. So if we
Sure.
lower that glass strength by introducing more flaws, things start to get a little more hazardous. Well, in the case of these guys, as soon as we put them in there, they're obviously you don't want to be banging it with your hanger in the hotel room. But for the most part, we have a fairly stable glass strength. But how big of a role does that actually play? Because, you know, static fatigue's a thing. Does glass strength really kind of drive this as it does in the glass container industry?
So it turns out that these actually don't operate on the basis of fine-tuning that glass strength at all. In fact,
Really?
they work with the tensile stress. And the reason is because anytime you're manufacturing something made out of glass, that handling condition is going to change that glass strength a bit, even if you're really careful. And that's something we teach about in a bottle, where you can't have every single bottle is going to have the exact same strength. So with glass, it's not like other materials. That's a problem if you're trying to make a fire sprinkler head that would always go at a certain strength value, because just due to variations in manufacturing and handling, it would be different.
Right.
Maybe that guy, hung something off of it and damaged it a little bit. The way that these work, though, is they have a mechanism whereby that liquid inside, it expands when there is a fire. So the temperature would rise, this creates an expansion, and eventually it reaches what's called hydraulic pressure load. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
But that's going to create enormous tensile stresses on this types of bulb. So no matter what that surface strength is, this thing is going to break. And it turns out that you can make it break at a pretty well-defined temperature.
Right. So as soon as you go hydraulic, right? As soon as you reach the hydraulic levels of pressure, we're getting kind of asymptotic in the load that's being applied to the glass vial.
Yeah.
And that happens very rapidly, is what you're saying.
Sure.
Drives up and the glass strength could be super high, it could be super low, but as soon as we go hydraulic, bam, we get failure.
Yeah, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. Can we go back to the other slide?
Yeah,
that I gave you?
absolutely. Let's do that.
Okay, so
It's a fun slide here.
how do we actually make this thing go hydraulic? What are we doing here? Well, we know that hydraulic lifts, hydraulic types of equipment, it operates on the principle you can't compress a fluid. And so when we are trying to make let's say a beer bottle or a soda bottle, we always want to make sure that we have what's called a headspace. We got to have some empty space on the top of it so that we don't have this hydraulic pressure being generated. Otherwise, it's going to explode. The same principle is actually being used in these little glass bulbs and fire sprinklers. So something in common between a beer bottle and a little fire sprinkler bulb is that it relies on this headspace principle. Now, one of the cool things about these fire sprinklers is they come in different colors. So maybe you can pick up a couple of those, Dominic. Okay, so I got a big one here. It's got a blue colored liquid inside the bulb.
I got a green one here.
And then we've got, if you've ever seen the hotel rooms, most of them are going to be red colored.
Looks like it's also red as well.
Yeah, red is probably the most common color you're going to see in residential type locations, at least that I've seen when I've looked. One of the properties of this is that these colors are standardized to describe at what temperature they're designed to break. And now if you take a look at this chart in back of me here,
we'll put it on a big screen for you guys to be able to see.
We have the different temperatures at which these things are fine-tuned to break. And the temperatures for the red ones, that's typically around 68 centigrade, so that's 155 Fahrenheit. So it's hot. It's not quite, we're not up to boiling hot, but it's pretty hot. So if you were in a room that temperature, that would be like danger territory. So that's
unlikely for some sort of room in a commercial setting or a residential setting to get up to that temperature. So if it somehow got up to that temperature, it's a safe temperature to not get on a daily average, not if you're cooking and all of a sudden you're getting smoke, but...
Right. And so some of these other ones, though, the different colors, these yellows, greens, and blues, now we're getting into these higher temperatures. Some of these are even above the boiling temperature, boiling point. Where might you want that to be like that? Maybe like a boiler room environment, some type of industrial environment where you have some really high temperature equipment where on a daily basis it gets very hot in there, but you still want to prevent against a fire. So we don't see those as often in terms of, at least I haven't seen those in my industrial environments. So these different colors, just as a coloring added to these different types of bulbs. But the thing that you'll notice if we look at these bulbs behind me is that the volume of the little bubble inside them increases as we go from these lower temperatures to the higher temperature bulbs. And so what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of headspace. And that means that the liquid has a little bit more room to expand, and it takes more of a temperature increase before they get to that hydraulic range. So now I think we're ready to get into that.
Right. So we're really tightly controlling that headspace in order to get to that very specific temperature. So yeah, I'm going to hop a slide here, and we're going to look at this chart. And this is the important part, right? This is the whole design's built around this.
Exactly.
Idea.
So this is how the bulbs actually function and how we make sure that they break at this certain temperature. This is a chart that was adapted from this paper I found where it really describes what happens to the pressure inside these bulbs as a function of the headspace. So depending on what type of liquid that you can put in here, those properties will vary. So some of these liquids I found, could be water, could be acetone, could be dichlorobenzene, could be alcohol, could be glycerin. These have different properties of thermal expansion, and they also have different properties of heat capacity, of how much energy it takes to raise that temperature by a degree. So I think when I pick up these little sprinkler heads, some of them, the bubbles go up very, very fast, and some of them, they go up very slowly. And I'm pretty sure it's because some of them have like a thick material in them, like glycerin. Some might have alcohol in them that are much less viscous. In any case, what we can do is we can calculate. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm fascinated by the little bubble as it goes up and down.
It's almost like a little lava lamp.
It is.
This blue one goes very slowly. I'm pretty sure it's glycerin in there, something very, very thick.
Really slow.
In any case, when we just take an example of a typical liquid and we plot that out, we can see that for a small headspaces, so 2%, 4% headspace, once we hit a certain temperature, the pressure just goes exponential. It just goes off the charts. That's what we mean when we say something's going hydraulic. Right. So we get into this range where even a tiny increase in the temperature, we're just going super high pressures. So this chart goes up to about 25 bar. That's where it maxes out. That's hundreds of pounds per square inch.
Right.
And so these bulbs, they won't be able to withstand that pressure. It doesn't matter what your surface strength is. When you go hydraulic, this bulb will break. The same thing happens when we talk about glass bottles, which is the really cool tie-in. If we go hydraulic with our glass bottles, we don't have enough headspace in those glass bottles are going to shatter as well.
Break. Absolutely. And that's something we want to avoid in the glass containing industry, which is fascinating with these guys because that's something we actually want to happen. We're finally tuning them with the idea that eventually we're going to meet that headspace requirement, hit hydraulic pressures. The glass will break. And I believe these are tempered glass more often than not.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Some of that can be a trade thing, whether or not they temper it.
Okay.
They are, however, under a good bit of stress, I was able to find.
Oh, really?
I've looked at this under a polarizing light microscope, and or a polarizing light source, and if you do that, you can see a lot of stresses in here. That's because these valves, these metal spring valves, they're exerting a force on these different bulbs.
Okay.
And that is designed to, of course, you got to keep that bulb tightly shut and the valve tightly shut because you don't want to release your water.
Right. You got to keep it sealed.
So you're going to at least have water pressure on this, and you got to have something pushing there so that when this bulb breaks, that is going to release the valve and you're going to get the water coming out. So these bulbs are actually very precisely engineered to be able to withstand a lot of that force. So they also have to not just break at a certain temperature, but they have to be able to withstand the force of the valve compressing it for decades, as long as this thing is in place. And that's another fascinating aspect of how these are designed.
Right. So we got we talked about the colors, the different head spaces, and obviously to tie that all in, the different colors, the different head spaces are to correlate with the different temperatures they're designed to break at, right? So the smaller head spaces, they'll break much quicker. Those are going to be our red ones, which are going to break, you said, about 155 degrees Celsius.
That was
Fahrenheit. Yeah, the 155 degrees Fahrenheit versus, say, the blue, which is more of an industrial setting, well above boiling. So those are going to have a larger bubble or a larger head space in order to meet those temperature standards. So
we can never get too much of a headspace in these bulbs, though, because in the chart here, if we look at this, we see if we get upwards of the 8 to 10% more than that headspace, we get a much slower pressure rise with temperature, and that means that that temperature at which things are going to burst is not going to be as well defined. It's not going to be as tightly controlled. So whatever the materials are, whatever the liquids are that are selected, it has to be designed so that we're always operating with a pretty tightly a tight temperature range where it goes hydraulic.
Right.
We're not experts in how these are made. I tried to look up why certain liquids would be chosen for these fire sprinkler heads. If you know, if you're watching this or listening to us, please feel free to drop a comment if you can tell us why a certain liquid would be chosen versus another in these bulbs, because it's something that was interesting, but I just couldn't find.
Yeah, it's eluding us. We'd love to know. So I have a great question. Why glass? Why aren't we using a different material for this same concept?
Well, that's a good point. There are other ways that these can be designed, and again, I was trying to look up the relative merits of it. Instead of using a glass bulb, you are able to use just a fusible metal linkage. So you can use something that's like some of the original ones that relied on solder, where solder would melt at a particular temperature, and then that would release the valve. So there are solder-based versions of these fire sprinkler heads. I don't know the relative pros or cons of those. I can't really describe to you why you would want one versus the other.
If I had to speculate, since glass is catastrophic, you could be very fine-tuned with the temperature, and that would probably be the leading reason.
One of the major innovations in these bulbs, I was reading a patent. It came out in the 1980s. This patent, it made an improvement of changing the design to this kind of a dog bone shape, where you have these thicker bulges at the bottom and the top. And the sidewalls, though, are relatively
I think this is it,
thin.
actually. I think this is the job. It's got their branding on it.
Yeah, so that's one of the companies that came out with this patent. And the reason that they did that is the design is meant to actually increase the surface area relative to the volume ratio. And so if they make this middle part, the middle part of the bulb, very, very thin, that means that you can have increased access to the temperature, so the fire is going to heat it up faster, and it'll have a faster response. Whereas before they did these strength improvements, you had to have a thicker bulb that could withstand that constant force that's pressing on this thing.
Right.
And so you had a thicker glass, and you had to have a wider diameter bulb. Consequently, the surface area to volume ratio was actually lower, and so it would take longer to respond. It would take more time for this thing to heat up. So this fast response bulb was one of the major innovations of the 80s, and it had to do with tuning this shape of this bulb to be able to strong enough to withstand the constant force being placed on it, but yet to have that right type of ratio to react quickly to changes in temperature when we get to that temperature range where it would go hydraulic.
Interesting. You know, just a funny thing popped in my mind. I just realized that, we have the break glass in case of emergency thing for like fire extinguishers and the axes. This is kind of the same concept, but slightly different. It's not a manual process of breaking the glass. This is all due to that headspace and temperature.
Completely automatic.
So fascinating how we've kind of kept that in.
There's also kind of a cool tie-in with some of the different properties of glass we talk about. We mentioned static fatigue a little bit earlier.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So one of the reasons why you don't want to hang your clothing on the bulbs is not just that you might break the bulb immediately, but you could just scratch it, and you could scratch that bulb and damage it. And because these are under a constant tensile stress, glass is subject to a static fatigue phenomenon, which we see in the container glass world a lot, where loads that have a finite duration, like past the length of an impact, they can cause glass strength to decrease if you have that tensile stress. There has been research done on these where some researchers intentionally kind of damaged these bulbs, and they wanted to see, well, how long would it take for them to break if they were going to break? And they found that after they did some damage to the bulbs on purpose, that if they were going to break, it would happen within about a month or so. And that's because they were getting the glass above the static fatigue limit. They were damaging it to the point where it actually was weakening. But if the bulbs didn't break within that month, they let it go for 2 more years and no more bulbs broke. And this is very, very much like what we see in the container glass world. The static fatigue limit tells us about how severe a flaw has to be for static fatigue to take place. And in general, the rule of thumb is if the bottle is going to break due to a storage load and no conditions change, typically it's going to break within a couple weeks of storage.
Right.
And so this is something that we sometimes see with delayed breakage failures let's say in a warehouse. Yeah. Can be due to damage to a pressurized bottle typically.
Right.
So that's another
and that works together because about a month, couple weeks, that's pretty similar. So the findings resonate with what we know.
Yeah.
Here in the
and it has to do with just the properties of glass, fracture mechanics, and how that slow crack growth, that's the technical term for it, how that can proceed.
Slow crack growth. Yeah, awesome. So quite fascinating. Now, obviously, you said these last for years and years and years.
Right.
The little bit of maintenance that you would have to do on these is basically just check. Actually, let me ask you this. How do you replace these? You can't just replace the bulb, right? Because they're under a ton of stress. So you actually have to...
I actually do not know the answer to that, what they do.
Really?
If there's a fire and these go off, what do they do? I do not know.
So from the limited research that I did, and I was kind of trying to throw the question at you, was they actually have to replace the entire heads. These are actually manufactured in such a way, like you were saying before, all that stress that's being kind of compressed onto these tubes, they manufacture this thing kind of in one go, essentially. So you, unfortunately, cannot just take a bunch of these little glass tubes and carefully insert them back into the head. These actually need to be manufactured in such a way that it's all done at the same time. So unless there is maybe a company or two out there that has worked their way around that, they kind of unscrew the entire head out and replace it with a brand new bulb and sprinkler head. So I don't believe they do that very frequently. Obviously, in terms of a maintenance, these are built to last, and that's why they're so nice. The fact is that they are fine-tuned to a very specific temperature. They're able to save lives in the event of a fire emergency, and pretty simple. Yeah, overall design.
The glass is impermeable. That little bubble's not going anywhere. It's in there. So one of the other properties of glass.
Yeah, glass is pretty awesome. If you guys want to learn more about glass, we actually teach about hydraulic loads and things of that nature in the glass setting in our Fracture 2 course.
Right, so that's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but we talk about head space and how that can cause fracture of bottles. That would be our Fracture 2 class. If you are interested in design of containers and what is a proper headspace to have in bottles, well, that's going to vary depending on the contents, because we talked a little bit about thermal expansion. If you have an alcoholic product versus a non-alcoholic product, that's going to matter also whether it's carbonated or not. So that would be, we have a course on design and lightweighting of containers. So that would be something recommended if it's a topic you want to get into.
Absolutely.
But after this, I can guarantee you, whenever you go into a hotel room, you're going to be looking at that fire extinguisher on the wall now, the little sprinkler head, and you're going to know a little bit more about it than you did before.
Actually, there's one sprinkler head I do want to talk about because they actually have different designs here. This one actually shoots out. And I believe that the reason is you don't want this being struck by something, right? Because you don't want it to hit the bulb. Maybe you're in a rowdy, more gym or something. Things are being tossed around. So they actually have these concealed in the ceiling. And when the bulb heats up, it breaks and it releases the sprinkler head down. Now, these heads are designed such that the water comes, splashes into the head, and shoots out in a kind of a conical shape. And I believe that was designed in such a way to prevent more water damage, kind of just pulling down into one place. But kind of fascinating the way they designed these guys.
Yeah, looks like a lot of engineering goes into this. There are some countries now that have mandated for new construction, even for private homes, not just public buildings, to have these types have concealed sprinkler heads in them. So you can put the sprinkler heads up into the ceiling, and they will be pretty much passive until there would be a fire, and then they'll kind of release some of their water. So a lot of interesting things happening there. Someday maybe it'll come to the States where you have to have them in your homes. I'm not sure. It's not in many countries at this point, at least as far as I could read.
My home's just stuck with the old smoke alarm, so
got the fire extinguisher in the kitchen. Hopefully
that's all I got. So I got to manually put that out. There's no automatic system.
Manual extinguisher.
Manual extinguisher, absolutely. So, Brandon, that's all I got. How about you?
I think that's everything for today.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, if you have any information on the type of solutions they use or why, please hit us up in the comments. Let us know if you have any other interesting facts about the fire sprinkler system and maybe the glass vials. We'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, you can check out our website if you want to learn more about hydraulic pressures, static fatigue, sign up for one of our classes. We'd be happy to have you. But otherwise, this is Dominic Baker
and Brandon Aldinger
signing off. Catch you later.